Welcome to my Sacred Revenge channel, where betrayal isn't just exposed, it's answered.
My hands trembled slightly as the sharp blade of the knife hovered above the delicate frosting, poised to slice into the lemon poppy seed cake. The rosettes, piped with extra care to appear fuller, had already begun to show faint cracks under. The subtle pressure. It was then, amidst the quiet hum of a carefully orchestrated afternoon, that my granddaughter Lyra whispered words that cut deeper than any blade. "You need to get away from your children immediately." Before I begin telling you my story, let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and if you'd like to share your own story, feel free to write to us. I froze, the knife momentarily forgotten. It wasn't the cake, of course, that arrested my movements. It was the chilling certainty in Lyra's voice. It didn't waver, nor did it plead. Her words landed with the precise, unsettling impact of a flat, smooth stone skipping once on perfectly still water. That particular day, the air in the house was thick with the seemingly innocent aromas of warm vanilla and fresh hydrangeas. My daughter Cordelia had arrived earlier with an armful of meticulously arranged blue and white bouquets, each nestled in mason jars wrapped with rustic twine. Aesthetic, she'd called it, her lips curving into that familiar, curated smile. I had merely nodded, letting her transform my kitchen into another one of her carefully crafted backdrops. The kitchen, usually a sanctuary of genuine domestic chaos, now buzzed with a muted, almost artificial softness, the peculiar kind of quiet that only arises when people are desperately pretending to be at ease. My son-in-law, Dominic, moved with the practiced grace of a set designer, carefully pouring sparkling elderflower cider into vintage crystal glasses he'd transported in a specially padded case. He handled them as if he were styling a high-end magazine shoot, not merely serving drinks at a family gathering. Cordelia stood by the window, her silhouette bathed in what seemed to be perpetually perfect lighting, as if she could instinctively find her ideal angle without even looking. She was dressed in flowing cream linen, barefoot, her hair casually pinned up, embodying the image of serene post-meditation tranquility she so often projected to her followers. And then there was me. I stood awkwardly by the pristine kitchen island, a knife still clutched in my hand, my granddaughter, Lyra, piercing me with a gaze that saw straight through the carefully constructed facade. The room itself didn't physically shift, yet something profound deep beneath my skin recoiled. My spine, suddenly rigid, conjured the ghosts of every long, arduous shift I had ever worked in my life. My knees, aching with a phantom fatigue, remembered every single moment they had stoically held me upright when all I desired was to collapse. My hands, once capable of such intricate precision, went utterly still. Lyra took a tentative step closer, her expression suggesting she might repeat her urgent warning. But she didn't have to. I had heard it the first time, and with a sudden, horrifying clarity, I understood. This was no ordinary family drama, no petty squabble over forgotten chores or missed RSVPs. This was not a youthful exaggeration born of teenage angst. This was something far, far more significant, something sinister. I forced a brittle smile, and with a deliberate, almost surgical precision, I slid the knife all the way through the moist lemon poppy seed cake, releasing the delicate fragrance of lavender glaze. It was Cordelia's favorite, not mean a detail that felt acutely symbolic as I cut it. The irony wasn't lost on me that I, the woman who had nurtured her, taught her to bake, and built this very kitchen, was merely a prop in her meticulously curated narrative. The assembled guests, mostly strangers from Cordelia's wellness brand, offered polite, dutiful applause. Someone from her team immediately began filming on their phone, capturing the perfect, authentic moment. Dominic leaned into the frame, his arm draped possessively around Cordelia's waist, as if they were unveiling a revolutionary new product line. Lyra, however, remained unmoving, her eyes locked onto mine with an unnerving intensity. I offered her a slice of the cake, but she made no move to take it. It was in that precise moment, watching her unwavering gaze, that the truth truly sank in. This birthday celebration, this carefully constructed tableau, didn't belong to me. It never had. And let me be clear, this isn't one of those dramatic stories where everything unravels in a single explosive instant. No, it began subtly, insidiously. Here, with a cake I had no desire to bake, in a kitchen adorned with flowers that were never truly meant for me, and a quiet whisper from a young girl who, against all rational judgment, still believed I was worth saving. If any part of this chilling tale resonates with you, I urge you to keep listening. Perhaps, like me, you've been smiling for far too long in a room that ceased to be yours years ago, after the last slice of cake had been served, and the intrusive camera flashes had finally subsided. I found Lyra waiting for me by the pantry door. Her face was devoid of expression, a mask of unnerving stillness. She didn't smile, she didn't even blink. Her phone was held low in her hand, the screen dimmed, her thumb hovering precariously over the edge, as if she were weighing the colossal decision of whether or not to press play. She didn't need to. A cold dread had already begun to unfurl within me. A terrifying certainty that something fundamental had irrevocably cracked open. Something that I would never be able to mend or close back up again. Dominic's booming laughter echoed from the living room, unnaturally loud, as he swirled his drink with an air of theatrical nonchalance, treating it like a mere prop in their grand production. Cordelia had, as usual, vanished down the hallway, her laptop clutched in her hands, undoubtedly on a quick check-in with her ever-present brand team. It dawned on me, with a sickening jolt, that every single element in this house, every cherished memory, every intimate corner, had been systematically transformed into content. Every slice of my life, every deeply personal memory layered into these very walls, now served as nothing more than a carefully curated background for someone else's meticulously crafted narrative. Lyra, without a single word, slid the phone into my trembling palm. I tapped the screen, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. At first, there was only a low static, then Dominic's voice. It was hushed, yet unsettlingly casually. Kind of casualness that only manifests when a person feels utterly, completely safe and unobserved. "She's almost there," he murmured, his voice laced with a predatory calm. "One more slip-up. One more time she forgets to turn off the stove or repeats herself in public, and the doctor will sign the statement." Then came Cordelia's voice, sharper, colder, tighter. "I've got the script written," she stated, her words devoid of any emotion. "We just need her out of the way before the new product line drops. If we wait too long, it looks messy." Lyra remained unflinching beside me, her young face a mask of silent stoicism. I, on the other hand, felt as though all the air had been violently sucked from my lungs. I handed the phone back to her, my gaze drawn almost magnetically to a vibrant bowl of lemons resting innocently on the counter. For a fleeting, desperate second, I entertained the absurd notion of throwing one knot at anyone. Not in anger, but simply against the cool, unforgiving kitchen tile, just to hear the satisfying sound of something finally breaking. Instead, I mechanically reached for a dish towel, my hands finding a strange comfort in the familiar fabric, and began wiping a counter that was already perfectly clean. "They want me gone," I whispered, the words escaping my lips not to Lyra, but simply into the quiet, heavy air of the room. "They need your image," Lyra replied, her voice soft but firm, "but not your voice." I stood there, the dish towel clutched in my hand, and a lifetime of sacrifices washed over me. I thought of all the countless times I had willingly made room for Cordelia, yielding my own desires for hers. The time she'd suffered crippling stage fright before her very first recital. And I'd stood in the wings whispering encouragement until her trembling stopped, the way she had begged, tears streaming down her face. to transfer schools because she felt she didn't fit in, and I'd pulled every string to make it happen. The nights she had wept inconsolably over her first failed relationship, calling me, desperate to come home, and I had, without hesitation, opened my doors. She had indeed come home, and with a slow, insidious creep, she had gradually, systematically made it hers. The rustic mason jars that now adorned every surface. The flimsy linen curtains that replaced my own cherished drapes. The abstract prints on the walls that looked like nothing and meant even less to me. I hadn't chosen any of it, had I? Simply let it happen, passively allowing the tides of her ambition to wash over my life. 'Cause that's what you instinctively do when you love someone with every fiber of your being. You let things happen. You make allowances, you make sacrifices, till one day you look around and the very essence of your home, your life, your identity, no longer feels like your own. Lyra stepped closer again, her voice a low murmur. There's more. From her worn canvas bag, she produced a folder, a thin, ominous collection of printed emails, official-looking insurance documents, and a chillingly precise typed-up schedule for an in-home evaluation by a doctor I had never even heard of, let alone met. They were planning with clinical detachment to have me declared mentally unfit. It's the ultimate goal, to transfer all my assets, to systematically take over everything I had painstakingly built over a lifetime. Voice caught in my throat. I didn't speak. I simply, robotically folded the dish towel, placed it neatly beside the sink, and stared out the window at the garden I used to tend with such care. The once manicured rosemary bush had gone wild, overgrown, and untamed. The sweet basil, a staple of my kitchen, was entirely gone. Something else had taken root there, a foreign, unwelcome presence. And it was undeniably not mine. I didn't ascend the stairs to my bedroom that night. Instead, I remained in the kitchen, a silent vigil, long, after the last candle had sputtered and died, after Dominic had meticulously packed away his camera equipment, and Cordelia had retreated, not to her childhood room, but to the designated guest room she no longer even bothered to ask to stay in. I stayed right there, huddled in the corner, by the stove. My gaze fixated on the intricate lines between the tiles lines I had scrubbed clean 1,000 times with devotion. The house was steeped in silence, but it was not the comforting quiet of peace. No, it was the heavy, oppressive silence of abandonment. Pipes settled with ghostly sighs. The ancient oak tree, towering above the back patio, creaked intermittently like a sorrowful lament. A lone car passed once, its tires whispering slowly. Over the gravel road outside, tried to count those fleeting sounds, a futile attempt to distract myself, to keep the intrusive thoughts at bay. But the thoughts came anyway, relentless and sharp. There was a time, not so long ago, when Cordelia would have flower dusted charmingly on her nose every Saturday morning. She'd lean against the counter next to me, her young arms crossed impatiently, her ponytail swinging with innocent eagerness. As she peppered me with endless questions about the mysterious alchemy that made dough rise, or why some recipes insisted on lemon zest instead of mere juice, I never once admitted that I didn't possess all the answers. I simply allowed her to believe that I did, relishing in her wide-eyed admiration. Back then, the old gas stove was a temperamental beast, notoriously unpredictable. Sometimes it would click interminably, an unsettling hiss before the flame finally caught with a soft whoosh. She was terrified of that sound, so I would always light it before she even walked into the kitchen, even if it meant striking the match twice, 3 times. I'd joke that I was braver than any fireman, and she would erupt into that uninhibited, full-bodied laugh, a joyous sound that originated deep in her chest. That kind of laugh, I realized with a pang, simply disappears with age. I hadn't heard it in years. Tonight, standing over that very same stove, my mind drifted back to the lemon poppy seed cake. I remembered how Cordelia had specifically requested it, how she had smiled that practiced. Empty smile when I brought it out, how she had thanked me with the detached politeness one would extend to a celebrity guest baker on her show. Not the woman who had painstakingly taught her the very first thing about a measuring cup. The cabinets, I noted with a fresh wave of despair, were Cordelia's. Now, she had replaced the original knobs, swapped my comforting ceramic canisters for sleek glass ones adorned with her perfect handwritten labels. She'd even painted the backsplash without so much as a consultation, claiming through Dominic that it looked cleaner, more modern. I had said nothing then, just as I said nothing now. I pulled open the drawer beneath the stove. It's the secret compartment where I used to hide her childhood birthday cards and the precious little notes Cordelia had scribbled for me when she was small. Most of them, I knew, were long gone, undoubtedly tossed during one of her ruthless reorganizing phases. But one, miraculously, remained. Folded twice, the edges yellowed with age, a vibrant heart drawn in red crayon. Inside, the simple, poignant words, "For Mom, you make everything better." I carefully, reverently placed it back exactly where I had found it. I closed the drawer quietly, the soft click echoing in the profound silence. The silence, I realized, no longer offered any solace. It merely confirmed the chilling truth. I had already acknowledged the warmth, the love, the very essence of home that I once felt here was no longer mine. I had been generous, perhaps to a fault. Generous with my space, with my forgiveness, with my unwavering trust. Far too generous. And now, the very walls that once resonated with genuine laughter held only the crushing weight of someone else's meticulously planned, predatory agenda when Lyra descended the stairs the following morning. Her steps light and purposeful, she found me still at the kitchen table. I hadn't slept a wink. I hadn't wanted to. Rest, I had come to understand, was no longer a safe haven. Sleep meant risking waking up in a house that no longer recognized me, to a life where my own daughter had ruthlessly rewritten the narrative, casting me as the inconvenient, disposable complication she desperately needed to remove. The stove clicked once, a faint, sharp sound, like a tiny warning shot. I didn't move. I simply watched it, waiting with a morbid curiosity to see if the flame would catch. The folder Lyra had brought, though thin only about a dozen pages, felt heavier than any of the hundreds of cookbooks I had ever published. Each page laden with a leaden weight of betrayal. These were not accusations. No, not outright accusations. They were far more insidious arrangements. Quiet, clean, pre-approved arrangements designed to systematically dismantle my life. 3 documents, in particular, screamed silently from the pages. The first was a form granting Cordelia partial, insidious access to all my digital accounts. It bore a signature that looked disturbingly close to my own, close enough to pass. The second was a chilling letter of intent, falsely stating that I was considering transferring the ownership of my beloved cooking studio to a new LLC. An LLC Cordelia had quietly registered under a deceptive name just 2 months prior. The third, and perhaps most horrifying, was an insurance policy I had never, ever heard of, listing Dominic as the primary beneficiary in the event of my death. The payout was astronomical, obscenely high for a policy I had no recollection of signing, let alone applying for. If I remained silent for a long, agonizing time, the silence stretching taut between us. Lyra didn't push. She simply sat across from me, quietly eating toast she hadn't even bothered to butter, her gaze fixed on the world outside the window. As if she had already made a quiet peace with the chilling truth I was only just beginning to grasp. The kitchen, once my sanctuary, suddenly felt impossibly smaller. The familiar chairs uncomfortably hard, the air strangely too clean, too sterile. As if the house itself had already begun to adjust, subtly, to a version of me that was no longer truly here. I opened a drawer I rarely, if ever, used. It was where Cordelia kept her own set of kitchen tools when she deigned to cook here. The knives were all brand new, sleek stainless steel with ominous black handles, gleaming with an unearned superiority. Mine, my own well-loved, honest knives, were tucked away in a dusty box somewhere in the garage. I tentatively touched the very tip of one of her blades, just enough to feel its unnerving sharpness. Then, with a decisive click, I closed the drawer and locked it. I had installed that lock myself 5 years ago when Cordelia first began hosting her elaborate events in my home. I had told her with a forced cheerfulness that it was for safety. But in truth, I had desperately needed just one drawer. That was undeniably, irrefutably mine. Just one small private space in a home that was slowly being devoured by her insatiable ambition. That lock, I remembered, had 2 keys. One I always kept on my personal keychain. The other I had foolishly, trustingly given to her for emergencies. I checked my keychain. My key was still there, a cold metallic comfort against my thumb that night. When Cordelia returned from her evening yoga session, she dropped her oversized designer bag onto the counter with a thud, as if she had always lived here, as if she truly belonged. She opened the refrigerator, pulled out a bottle of absurdly expensive pressed green juice, and walked away without a single word. I waited until I heard her light footsteps retreating upstairs, fading into the comfortable silence of her guest room. Then, with a surge of desperate hope, I checked the drawer again. Unlocked. The lock wasn't broken. It had been opened meticulously, deliberately, with a key. The second key. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I sat in my armchair, hands folded, tightly in my lap, the damning folder still resting heavily on my thighs. Around 2 a.m, a restless energy propelled me out to the garage. I rummaged through dusty boxes until I found the one containing my old knives, the honest ones. Dull wooden handles, a faint rust beginning to speckle their edges. They felt like old friends, familiar and comforting in my hands. I brought them back into the kitchen, placing them carefully, almost reverently, on the counter. Then, with a newfound resolve, I locked the drawer again, and this time I kept both keys. I wasn't ready to speak, not yet, but something profound had irrevocably shifted within me. This wasn't merely about money or even the crushing weight of betrayal. It was about something far more primal, space, about the silent, insidious erasure of a life, one drawer at a time. One forgotten password, one manipulated document, one stolen key, until there was nothing left of the person you once were, nothing left of you in the very house you had poured your life into building. On a crisp Wednesday morning, Cordelia, with a forced cheerfulness that grated on my nerves, announced her intention to film a new episode for her sprawling wellness series. She declared it a spontaneous mother-daughter segment, assuring me that her devoted audience loved authenticity. 20 minutes later, Dominic arrived. His massive camera gear meticulously packed into soft-sided cases, each emblazoned with his production brand's sleek logo. He greeted me with a peck on the cheek, proclaiming me radiant with a saccharin smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I merely nodded, refusing to return his empty pleasantry. The kitchen, I noted with a sigh, had already been completely rearranged before I'd even had my first cup of coffee. Cordelia had swapped out my familiar aprons, replacing them with new ones bearing their corporate logo. Dominic, meanwhile, adjusted lighting angles with the intense focus of someone preparing for a groundbreaking documentary. He instructed me to stand at the left side of the counter, where the light supposedly hit best. I, however, stood precisely where I always had, in the middle, rooted to my own space. Lyra quietly helped me prep the ingredients. She didn't speak much, but her perceptive eyes missed absolutely nothing. As I handed her the flour, she subtly slipped a small black camera from her pocket, placing it discreetly between the cookbook stand and the spice rack. It was a tiny device, no bigger than a matchbox, with no visible lens or blinking lights. She then placed a ceramic spoon rest in front of it, effectively concealing it, and stepped away. Cordelia, meanwhile, glided into center screen, her smile wide and practiced. She introduced us as if I were merely a celebrity guest chef on her burgeoning platform, a transient attraction. Her hand brushed mine as she reached for the whisk, and the touch, far from being soft or affectionate, felt like a cold, calculated cue. From behind the camera, Dominic gave her an approving thumbs dash up. We embarked on making almond scones with lavender glaze, my recipe, a cherished classic. Cordelia, however, grandiosely declared it an inspired fusion for her audience. Didn't bother to correct her. Her devoted followers, I knew, would consume it regardless of the truth. Halfway through the performance, Cordelia leaned conspiratorially toward the camera, her voice dripping with artificial gratitude, thanking everyone for tuning in. She spoke eloquently and entirely disingenuously about legacy, about generational knowledge, about the honor of learning from a parent. The tone was cloyingly syrupy, almost unbearable. From behind the camera, Dominic subtly mouthed lines to her, a silent choreography of deceit. The moment Dominic stopped rolling, the air in the kitchen shifted, the forced camaraderie instantly evaporating. Cordelia wiped her hands, her smile dissolving into a thin line of dissatisfaction. Dominic handed her a drink, then asked her how. She thought it went. She sighed, declaring it felt a little flat, criticizing me for not giving enough energy. Then, with a chillingly detached smile that only reached her mouth, she turned to me. She suggested, with a feigned lightness, that perhaps we could record one more version later in the week, something warmer, something more emotive. She even had the audacity to add, maybe you could wear something brighter, or speak a little faster. It's just a suggestion, of course. I met Lyra's gaze. Her face remained still, impassive, but she offered a single, small, certain nod. Later that night, within the blessed privacy of Lyra's room, she showed me the raw footage from her hidden camera. It had captured everything, not just the meticulously staged performance, but the chilling comments made afterwards. The casual cruelty in Cordelia's voice when she thought I wasn't listening. The way Dominic referred to me as the brand's nostalgic anchor. His words, not mine. They weren't building a legacy. They were building a cold, calculated product. And I was merely the aging, disposable packaging. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I simply sat on the edge of her bed, pressing play again, watching the carefully constructed smile on Cordelia's face flicker, then vanish as she turned away. It wasn't cruel, not overtly. It wasn't angry. It was impossibly far worse. It was sheer, unadulterated indifference. That Friday, Lyra made a point of skipping her morning lecture. She sat at the dining table, a battered notepad open beside her, her laptop displaying 3 browser windows. I recognized one as a reputable legal site, another clearly a news outlet. The third showed a crisp profile picture of a woman in uniform. Lyra tapped the screen with a determined finger. Detective Evelyn Thorne, she explained, her voice low and steady. Financial Crimes and Elder Protection Unit based in Riverbend. Quiet, precise, and notoriously difficult to reach. But I found her. Lyra went on to explain that this particular detective had once spearheaded a complex case where a son, driven by greed, had used forged documents to gain control of his elderly VO, mother's medical and financial rights. The outcome of that case had been remarkably public and highly unusual. The son had lost everything, his reputation in tatters. The mother, against all odds, had miraculously reclaimed her name, her dignity, and her life. Lyra had already sent Detective Thorne a detailed message. I stood silently in the doorway, my hands tucked deep into my pockets, watching Lyra work with the quiet intensity of someone performing an entirely natural, everyday task. I said nothing, simply listened to the rhythmic tap-tap of her keys and the faint, reassuring hum of the refrigerator behind us. She looked up, her gaze meeting mine. "There's a clear pattern to what they're doing," she stated, her voice unwavering. "It's not just you. Cordelia and Dominic have been systematically using your presence, your image, to build their brands. Value. It's emotional branding, targeting an audience primarily women, who deeply miss their mothers, who crave that sense of warmth and authenticity you represent." The words landed in the quiet room like another flat stone, not heavy, but utterly, irrevocably final. I walked to the kitchen, the familiar space suddenly charged with a new, urgent energy, and turned on the kettle. The comforting scent of chamomile tea began to fill the air. I opened the pantry door. The glass jars were still neatly labeled in Cordelia's elegant, meticulous handwriting, a stark reminder of her pervasive influence. But hidden behind them, buried deep on the bottom shelf, I discovered a worn, familiar recipe card. My handwriting, faded with time, but instantly recognizable. Lemon cornbread with honey thyme butter. It read a recipe I hadn't thought about, let alone used, in years. I carefully placed it on the counter just to see it again, a small act of defiance. Cordelia came home around noon, a vision of polished, effortless chic in a soft white sweater and expensive, impractical shoes, her hair in a loose braid. Moved through the house with an air of absolute ownership, as if every corner, every piece of furniture, belonged to her alone. She surveyed the kitchen with a critical eye, declaring it felt stale, suggesting, with a dismissive wave of her hand, that perhaps we should repaint before the next shoot. "Don't worry," she added. "Marcus will call someone." I offered no response. Her gaze, cold and assessing, fell upon the counter, lingering on the humble recipe card. Her mouth curved slightly, not in a smile, but in something else, something dismissive, almost disdainful. "Oh, that one's old," she murmured, her voice laced with polite condescension. "It doesn't fit the brand anymore." Then, with a shrug, she turned and walked upstairs, leaving me alone with my faded truth. I stared at the recipe card for a long time, its familiar lines a silent challenge. Then, with a new sense of purpose, I slipped it into the pocket of my apron, pressing it against my heart. That afternoon, Lyra made another call. This time, Detective Evelyn Thorne picked up. They spoke in low, quiet sentences, a hushed conspiracy of justice. Lyra meticulously took notes, her pen scratching softly on the paper. Dates, document numbers, a crucial contact at the insurance board. We're building something slowly, patiently. Like a slow stew simmering on the back burner, its flavors deepening with every passing hour. By evening, I was utterly exhausted, not from physical exertion, but from the sheer, immense effort of holding still, of waiting, of planning in silence. Before I finally allowed myself to go to bed, I made a list. Not a list of people to confront, or accusations to hurl. No, this was a list of recipes, old ones, the ones Cordelia had systematically erased from their website. The ones I used to make when this house was filled with the genuine, unforced laughter of a loving family, not the hollow canned applause of a curated audience. I folded the list and tucked it carefully under my pillow, a silent promise whispered into the night. Sometimes, I realized, you don't fight fire with fire. Sometimes you simply allow them to light the match and then you wait. Because every meticulously crafted role, every performance, comes with an unspoken script. And sometimes, just sometimes, that script breaks. And when it does, the raw, unadorned truth walks in quietly, uninvited, and utterly impossible to ignore. On a serene Sunday morning, I retrieved the heavy, cast-iron skillet that had sat unused for years, gathering dust in the back of a cabinet. It was an ancient thing with a worn handle and a tiny, almost imperceptible crack along its sturdy edge. It had been my mother's, a relic imbued with generations of culinary love and warmth. I scrubbed it clean, carefully oiled it lightly, and left it to slowly heat in the oven, a silent sentinel of stories untold. That skillet had nourished hundreds of meals, countless family gatherings. It would, I knew, make just one more. Cordelia was away for a meticulously planned speaking event, Dominic faithfully trailing her with his ever-present camera and tripod. They wouldn't be back until Monday. I had time, precious, unburdened time. Lyra sat at the kitchen table methodically, sorting through a growing stack of files, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked up, her gaze meeting mine, when I pulled out my old recipe box, its wooden surface smooth from years of use. I didn't have to say a word. She understood. That night, with a quiet resolve, I announced a special live stream on my almost forgotten social media page. I composed the post myself, a simple, heartfelt caption accompanied by a candid picture of the old cast iron skillet and a folded anonymous recipe card. No hashtags, no filters, no Cordelia, just a time. Tuesday evening, 7 o'clock p.m., one camera, one stove, one story. By the very next morning, the post had garnered more shares than anything I had ever published in my life. Lyra meticulously checked the numbers. The views were climbing steadily, organically. Followers began to leave comments, old students, former coworkers, even strangers who remembered the early days of my unpretentious cooking show. Some said they missed my cornbread. Others simply said they missed me. Tuesday arrived quietly, almost reverently. I wore my oldest apron, the faded blue one with carefully stitched corners and a name tag that had blurred into an indistinct shape. Over the years, Lyra adjusted the lights, positioned the microphone, and meticulously tested the stream connection. She didn't speak much, and we didn't need to. Our understanding was deeper than words. Cordelia and Dominic returned that afternoon, their faces tight with exhaustion from their travels. They didn't comment on the live stream setup, which stood conspicuously in the center of the kitchen. Dominic merely grunted, asking if the kitchen was clean. Cordelia glanced at the camera, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, and made a quick note on her phone. She declared imperiously that she would be ready by 7, at precisely 6 p.m. I handed Lyra a sealed envelope. I want this filed with the attorney first thing tomorrow, I instructed, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil within me. She nodded, her young eyes firm. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out another list, not of recipes, this time but of names. Friends, trusted colleagues, key witnesses who had, without question, agreed to stand by me. Each one had been contacted, each one ready, not loud, not public, but solid. Unyielding dot, at 6:30 p.m., Cordelia descended the stairs, her face flawlessly made up. Her cream sweater spotless, her eyes gleaming with a practiced, predatory ambition. Dominic sat stiffly beside Lyra, offering her a cold, almost reptilian smile. She did not return it. At 7 p.m., the moment of truth arrived. I stepped into the frame, bathed in the soft, warm glow of the kitchen lights. No Cordelia, no Dominic, just me and the skillet. I began simply with cornbread. I spoke about time, about honey warmed gently over a low flame, about how recipes are inherited, passed down through generations, but how their true meaning, their very soul, is earned through love and honest effort. 10 minutes into my quiet monologue, Cordelia unexpectedly entered the shot, her face a mask of feigned surprise. She smiled brightly for the camera, declaring it a surprise visit, an impromptu, heartwarming moment. I merely nodded, allowing her to speak, allowing her to perform her well-rehearsed charade. Then I paused. I looked directly into the lens, my gaze piercing the fourth wall. And I said, my voice clear and resonant, there is one ingredient no one talks about, the one that truly makes or breaks a recipe. It's not salt, it's not time, it's truth. With that, I lifted the sealed envelope, the one I had given Lyra to file, and deliberately placed it on the counter next to the skillet. Then, with a definitive click, I turned off the burner beneath the empty pan. The room held its breath, suspended in a pregnant silence. Behind the camera, Lyra quietly pressed save, then upload. That night something shifted, not just in the stagnant air of the kitchen, not merely in the climbing viewer numbers, but profoundly, irrevocably. Within me, the recipe, I realized, was no longer for them, for their brand, for their fabricated narrative. It was finally for me. And I had at long last cooked something that could never be stolen. Something that belonged to me and me alone. The live stream had begun precisely at 7 p.m. There was no dramatic countdown, no upbeat music, just me in. The frame bathed in the low, warm, unassuming kitchen lights. Nothing dramatic at all. I stood behind the island, my hands resting on the ancient cutting board, the cast iron skillet beside me already radiating a comforting warmth. The subtle, delicate scent of honey and thyme lingered in the air, almost imperceptible unless you were truly paying attention, truly feeling the moment. It wasn't a performance. It was a deeply personal return. I spoke slowly, deliberately about the profound connection between food and memory. About how every beloved dish we remember, every cherished flavor, has a person intrinsically tied to it. I shared the quiet history of the cornbread recipe, where it came from, how my own mother had taught it to me, how I used to make it for Cordelia after her grueling piano practices, how she, in her childhood innocence, had once called it magic. Bread because she believed it possessed the power to fix any bad day. I didn't force emotion into my voice. I allowed it to come naturally, effortlessly, like the gentle steam rising from the stove, a natural byproduct of honest recollection. Halfway through my quiet narrative, Dominic appeared, a shadowy figure behind the camera. He didn't speak, but he gave Lyra a pointed, impatient look. Then immediately pulled out his phone, his eyes scanning what I knew were climbing metrics. Cordelia followed a few minutes later, gliding into the kitchen with her usual practiced, quiet authority, already perfectly styled, lips slightly glossed, hair cascading in soft, artfully arranged waves. She positioned herself just off-frame, arms crossed, patiently waiting for her cue for the signal to join the charade. There was none. I didn't stop talking. I didn't alter my tone. Simply continued folding ingredients, letting the rhythmic, meditative motions of the recipe guide the atmosphere in the room. The viewer count, Lyra whispered at one point, was surging. But I kept my eyes steadfastly on the bowl, my focus unwavering. Then, with a flourish, Cordelia stepped into the shot. She plastered a wide, artificial smile on her face and placed a proprietary hand on my shoulder, as if she were spontaneously joining a heartwarming family reunion. Her voice, sweet and syrupy, lifted as she introduced herself, thanked everyone for watching, and with breathtaking audacity described this moment as spontaneous and beautiful. I merely nodded, saying nothing. She picked up a wooden spoon and began to stir awkwardly beside me, a prop in her own play. Dominic adjusted his lens, perfectly capturing the contrived angle, the manufactured intimacy. It was a perfectly choreographed dance down to the very breath. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They hadn't written the ending. Once the cornbread batter was perfectly ready, I poured it into the skillet, gently smoothed the surface, and slid it into the waiting oven. Then, with a deliberate, almost theatrical motion, I reached below the counter and retrieved a single manila folder, setting it prominently next to the stove. My hands lingered on it for a beat longer than strictly necessary. I announced, my voice clear and resonant, that I wanted to share one final ingredient, not for the bread, but for the unvarnished truth. I opened the folder slowly, allowing the tension in the room to build. Inside was a damning printed transcript, meticulously compiled clips from the last few months' audio recordings, video snippets, incontrovertible financial records, and a notarized affidavit from my attorney confirming the unimpeachable authenticity of each and every item. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't resort to accusations or emotional outbursts. I simply, calmly, read one chilling line from the transcript. This is what it sounds like when a family chooses silence over integrity. I closed the folder, slid it deliberately toward the edge of the counter, then looked directly into the camera, my gaze unblinking. I said nothing more. I didn't need to. Cordelia stood utterly frozen, her fingers still awkwardly curled around. The wooden spoon! Dominic slowly lowered his camera, his mouth half open, a look of stunned disbelief etched across his face. No one moved. The silence in the room was deafening, suffocating. Lyra ended the stream with a quiet, decisive tap. "It's uploading now," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. I turned away from the stunned tableau and walked to the oven. The timer hadn't chimed yet, but the rich, intoxicating aroma told me. The cornbread was ready. I pulled out the bread, golden and perfectly full, and set it down on the counter. It no longer mattered who stayed in the kitchen after that. The truth, undeniable and unalterable, had already left the room, spreading like wildfire. The morning after the live stream, I woke before the first hint of sunrise. The house was steeped in an eerie stillness, the comforting quiet of peace, but the lingering, oppressive stillness of abandonment. It clung to the corners, seeped. Under doors settled into the cushions of chairs that no one sat in anymore. The kettle clicked softly on the stove as I waited patiently for the water to boil. I didn't rush it. Lyra was already awake, her laptop open, its screen glowing with a dizzying cascade of notifications. Messages poured in, first hundreds, then thousands, most of them from complete strangers. Some were from people I hadn't heard from in years. Former colleagues, grateful students, loyal viewers who remembered the early, unpolished days of my original cooking show. Many were from women who had lovingly cared for their mothers, or mothers who had themselves been cruelly forgotten by their own children. The words were a potent bomb, soft and sharp all at once. "We saw you. We believe you. You reminded me of my own mother." I didn't reply to any of them. I simply read them slowly, one after another, allowing their profound truth to settle deep within me. A warmth against the lingering chill. Cordelia and Dominic didn't appear downstairs until after 9. Cordelia moved quickly, her phone clutched. In her hand, her thumbs typing furiously, non-stop. Her face was unnervingly calm, but her jaw was visibly locked, a rigid line of suppressed fury. She poured herself a coffee and retreated to the farthest corner of the kitchen, her back to the window, pointedly facing away from me. Dominic paced erratically, mumbling incoherent fragments about legal steps, contracts, and public image. His words overlapped, frantic and nonsensical. They didn't land. By noon, the inevitable fallout had begun in earnest. The prominent brand partnership they had so proudly touted announced an immediate review. A death knell in their industry. The wellness platform with quiet efficiency removed Cordelia's profile from its coveted homepage. 3 major media outlets had already reached out for comment, their inquiries sharp and insistent. Lyra handed me a printed copy of the first article. The headline was carefully measured, almost understated. But the subtext was crystal clear, stinging with an undeniable truth. Questions surface around authenticity in influencer mother-daughter brand. I left the article on the table, still unopened. By late afternoon, Dominic was gone. He packed quickly, his departure as abrupt and unceremonious as his arrival had been orchestrated. Cordelia didn't follow him. She spent the majority of the day locked away in her room. I heard her on the phone once, her voice muffled, clipped, as if she were delivering a grim report to an unseen superior. She didn't speak to me, not a single word. That night, I made dinner just for Lyra and me. A quiet, simple meal, devoid of cameras, devoid of curated plating. We ate in the breakfast nook, just like we used to when she would stay with me during her high school years. Those simpler, more honest times. Lyra lit a single candle, the cheap kind that smelled faintly of cinnamon, and set it on the table without a word, a small beacon of comfort in the fading light. As I stood to wash the dishes, I saw Cordelia in the hallway. She looked smaller than usual, less polished, her carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. She didn't enter the room, simply stood near the edge of the archway, a silent, spectral observer. Her mouth opened slightly as if to speak, then closed again. She nodded once, not in apology, not in surrender, but simply in acknowledgement of a truth that could no longer be ignored. Then she turned and walked away. I didn't follow her. Later, I sat by the back window, listening to the monotonous chorus of cicadas. The air was thick, heavy with the weight of late summer, pressing against the cool glass. I contemplated all, the insidious way silence could be wielded as a weapon, but also, surprisingly, how it could become a profound refuge. Not everything, I realized, needed to be spoken aloud, to be known, to be understood. Some truths simply settled in, quietly, like fine dust, unavoidable and irrefutable. That night, I didn't lock the kitchen drawer. Not out of a sudden surge of renewed trust, but because I no longer needed to. The drawer was mine again. Whether it held my old, honest knives or my faded, cherished recipes didn't matter. It held space, my space, and no one, absolutely no one, was going to take it from me this time. By the end of that week, Cordelia's meticulously constructed brand deals were either irrevocably paused or outright canceled, crumbling around her like a house of cards. The sleek studio she had rented for product shoots stood empty, lights off, shades drawn, a desolate monument to her fallen empire. The meticulously planned production calendar had vanished from her phone, a stark symbol of her fading relevance. Dominic never returned. A cold official notice arrived in the mail from the licensing board. A formal inquiry had been opened regarding Cordelia's blatant misrepresentation in financial filings and the potential chilling exploitation of a dependent adult, that sterile, clinical phrase that nonetheless cut straight through the pervasive silence of the house, slicing through the last vestiges of my denial. Lyra handed me the envelope without ceremony, her face a somber echo of the gravity contained within. I placed it on the coffee table beside a bowl of lemons, once vibrant, now beginning to soften and wither. Cordelia didn't cry. She didn't argue. She didn't demand explanations. She moved through the house with a peculiar, almost ghostly detachment, like someone perpetually waiting for a train that she instinctively knew would never arrive. The practiced confidence in her steps had faded, but not entirely. There was still a calculated precision in the way she answered phone calls, always by the window, always in a low, conspiratorial voice. I let her stay, not out of kindness, not out of lingering guilt, but because some painful truths, some profound reckonings, deserved to be seen all the way through to their bitter end. Lyra received a follow-up call from Detective Evelyn Thorne. They had thoroughly reviewed the footage. The affidavit, meticulously compiled, was officially accepted. Statements would be taken, a formal inquiry launched. It wasn't about pressing charges. Not for me. I wasn't looking for vengeance or even punishment. What I craved, what I desperately sought, was clarity for someone, somewhere to say aloud, unequivocally, that what had happened had happened. To validate my reality, that Sunday, with a profound sense of reclamation, I took back the studio. It was quiet, filled only with the ghosts of past endeavors. The door still creaked, just as it always had, a familiar lament. The walls were still lined with my old beloved cookbooks, some mine, some borrowed, all infused with the joy of creation. The chalkboard Cordelia had used for her vacuous branding slogan still bore her handwriting, a faded inscription of her fleeting ambition. I didn't erase it. Instead, I simply turned it over, revealing a clean, untouched surface, and wrote something new, something true. Legacy does not require performance. I opened the windows wide and the room filled with the clean, fresh air of liberation. Then, I walked to the shelf and pulled down a single, unassuming folder. Inside were the original articles of incorporation for the cooking studio, signed by me years ago before the cameras, before the hollow slogans, before Cordelia and her brand had ever entered my life. I took them to the courthouse Monday morning. Lyra came with me, her presence a silent, unwavering pillar of support. The clerk was polite, efficient, her movements practiced and devoid of judgment. The papers were restored. My name, my rightful ownership, returned to the public record. No grand announcements, no celebratory ribbon cutting, just a quiet, unassuming update in a dusty registry. That night I stood in my kitchen once more, utterly alone, yet never feeling more whole. The cast iron skillet was back on the stove, gleaming softly. I had seasoned it with meticulous care, imbuing it with a renewed purpose. It hissed gently as I carefully laid the cornbread batter onto its surface, a symphony of familiar sounds. The rich, comforting smell rose quickly, filling the air familiar, real, untainted. There was no camera, no microphone, just me and the quiet, profound sound of something becoming whole again. Cordelia's room remained dark that night, her presence a palpable absence. She didn't come down for dinner. Lyra did. We ate at the small table by the window, the soft glow of the kitchen lights casting long shadows. I didn't ask where Cordelia was. Didn't need to. Some things, I mused, collapse with a dramatic, explosive sound. Others fall quietly, subtly, like a curtain gently descending at the close of a long, arduous act. And when they do, what remains is not revenge, not a bitter victory. No, what remains is space. It is peace. It is something profoundly earned. Not by force, not by overt struggle, but by simply standing still long enough to be seen, to refuse to be erased. 2 weeks later, I quietly reopened the studio. There was no grand flyer, no public announcement, no press release, just an open door and the irresistible soul-stirring smell of fresh bread rising in a warm oven. The tables had been rearranged, no longer set up for a performance, but for genuine connection. The chalkboard wall now bore a simple, eloquent message in white chalk. You are still welcome here. No names, no corporate logos, no curated brand language, just the unvarnished truth, served quietly, authentically. I called this space something new, something that resonated with its true purpose. Not a brand, not a show, just a place. We called it the kitchen without conditions, a sacred room where women my age, and women of all ages could gather not to perform, but simply to cook, to speak their truths, to breathe freely. Some arrived with their aprons still folded, retrieved from drawers they hadn't opened in years, their hearts brimming with stories untold. Some brought only their silence. That, too, was welcomed, embraced. Lyra, with her quiet strength and unwavering dedication, helped me organize the sessions. She reached out to a few local community centers, establishing connections based on genuine need, not publicity. No social media blasts, no press kits, no flashy promotions. Word spread the way it used to, organically, authentically, one woman at a time, slow, steady, deeply human. We made simple, comforting food, cornbread, rich broths, potato salad recipes passed down through 3 generations. We shared recipes handwritten in faded ink on the backs of old utility bills and forgotten grocery lists. Each one a whisper of history. There were no cameras documenting every move, no scheduled smiles, no pressure to perform. No one asked for. Before and after photos, no one measured their worth in ephemeral followers. One afternoon, a woman named Lorraine arrived, carrying a tin of her exquisite butter cookies. She confided, her voice thick with unshed tears, that her daughter hadn't spoken to her in 4 long years. Yet, she still baked those cookies every single Sunday just in case, a silent, unwavering offering of love. I didn't ask for details. Didn't pry into her pain. I simply handed her a plate. We stood side by side, our hands moving rhythmically, folding dough together. In the comfortable quiet between instructions, I remembered how many desperate hours I had spent trying to be needed, trying to stay useful, clinging to a role long after it had devolved into a mere costume. That suffocating weight, I realized with a surge of relief, was finally gone. The studio now filled with a new kind of noise, the gentle scrape of spoons, the rhythmic clink of measuring cups, the soft, murmuring hum of stories being told. Not for the cold, unfeeling eye of a camera, but for each other, for genuine connection. Cordelia hadn't returned to the studio since the day the papers were reinstated. Her name restored to its rightful place. It's just she hadn't stepped into that sacred space again. And that, I realized, was perfectly all right. She had constructed something fragile, something meticulously curated. And when it finally cracked under the weight of truth, there was nothing substantial inside to hold it up. But here, in this humble kitchen, there was profound weight. There was enduring history. There was enough salt and flour, enough love and resilience to make something truly lasting. Lyra filmed none of it. But she diligently kept a notebook, a plain, soft-covered one with lines that bent slightly from the pressure of her diligent handwriting. She said one day it might become a book. I told her it already was, even if no one else ever read it. Some stories, I had learned, don't require publishing. Some are simply baked into the very air, imbued into the space, and held gently, reverently, in the knowing hands of those who remember. And that, I realized, with a deep, abiding sense of peace, was more than enough. The first rain of the season arrived quietly, a gentle blessing. No thunder, no dramatic lightning, just the soft, rhythmic hush of water brushing against the window panes, steady and soothing. I stood by the kitchen sink, a dish towel in hand, drying the last plate from that morning's class. The comforting, lingering scent of cinnamon and brown butter still permeated the air. Lyra had left early. She had an interview with a local community publication. She had pitched herself a story about the kitchen without conditions. She had asked if I wanted to join her. I had simply smiled and told her she already knew precisely what needed to be said. The house felt full in a new, profound way. Not brimming with people, not loud with forced noise, but brimming with a quiet, powerful presence. There was nothing left to be hidden, nothing left to be staged. Only things that were real and true, and that, finally, stayed. I reached into the drawer beside the stove and pulled out a single folded note. It had been there for years, forgotten between old instruction cards and faded measuring charts, silent relic of a time long past. The handwriting was Cordelia's, blocky and childlike from when she was 8 years old. "Thank you for making things feel safe," it read. I placed the note on the windowsill, leaving it open, a quiet testament to a fleeting, lost innocence. That afternoon, I baked another batch of cornbread. Not for a class, not for a live stream, not for a brand. Just because the kitchen, my kitchen, smelled infinitely better when something warm and honest emerged from its oven. As I pulled the steaming pan from the oven, I heard footsteps on the porch. Not rushed, not hesitant, just steady, purposeful. I didn't turn around. I sliced the bread slowly, carefully, placing 2 pieces on a small, unassuming plate. I set one at the table, the other I kept near me, and then I sat. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Some stories I had learned end with a door closing forever. Mine didn't. Mine stayed slightly open, beckoning. Long enough for the comforting scent to reach whoever truly needed to remember it. Long enough for me to finally, truly feel whole, without the desperate, crushing need to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be anything other than my true, authentic self. If you've ever been a mother, a daughter, or simply someone who stayed silent, perhaps out of love, perhaps out of fear, then this story was meant for you. Thank you for listening all the way through. If something in your kitchen or in your heart has ever been forgotten, Remember this? You can still begin again, quietly, without needing to prove anything, just by being yourself. If you saw yourself reflected in this story, know that you are not alone. And there is still so much of your inherent worth that no one, absolutely no one, has truly taken from you.